Hello and welcome to another episode of the Shakedown podcast. With me, as always, I have my brothers, my co-hosts, Baxty of Baxty BF1 and Shez at ShezMed on Twitter. How are we doing, chaps?
Good, thanks. Hope you're both doing well.
Yeah, yeah, good cameras.
Doing all right.
Fun week so
Doing
far.
all, doing all right, mate. Doing all right. I thought you guys were going to no-sell me again and just give me the radio silence. Where's my lawyer? I will not talk to you. Go on then, lads. Let's talk some 45 minutes or less. Let's talk some F1. I want to talk about Saudi Arabia, and the hot topic on everybody's lips is George Russell. Judas Iscariot or F1 driver Baxter? We'll come to you first, sir.
He's an F1 driver. For me, this is a non-story. I don't know why everyone's focusing on it. First of all, it was reported out. It was reported incorrectly by. I'm not blaming Crofty and Martin. They were given information and they put it out there. But they did their job. But the simple fact is, this team order that George got didn't exist. I was in some Twitter spaces after the race, and I spoke to a guy. Shout outs to Apex. He's a massive George Russell fan. He followed him on board, and I said to him, look, was George given a team order at any point? And he said no. The incident in question was that he was warned that Lewis had fresh tyres behind or softer tyres behind, but he was also conserving his tyres. George was conserving his tyres because he thought that Alonso hadn't served his penalty, so he thought that he had to go back in. At which point Mercedes then say to him, oh no, he's already served his penalty. At which point George goes, right, well, I'm going to get my foot on it then, and proceeds to gap Lewis on harder tyres. So,
which is chaos, by the way, Baxty. That's
chaos. I mean, we think it's partly to do with setup, because Lewis admitted after the race that his setup wasn't where he wanted it to be. He said he wanted George's setup, but went another direction. Well, I've mischaracterized that. He would have wanted George's setup in hindsight, but he went a different direction to George, and it didn't pay off for him. And George was consistently quicker over the entire weekend than Lewis. Look, George was just doing his job. Just because it's Lewis Hamilton behind him on softer tyres doesn't matter. The team haven't given him an order to move over. He's under no obligation to do it. I've heard some arguments that he needs to be a team player. Why? Unless the team explicitly tell him to move, he's under no obligation to do it just because it's Lewis.
Oh, let's go, Baxty. Shez, to that you respond how, sir?
I completely agree with all of that. I think Lewis on the medium tyres started off that restart pretty well. His move on Sainz was good. I don't normally advocate his round the outside passes, but this time actually it put Sainz out of position and gave him a good run on him at the exit. I thought it was really well worked. But then he came up against a guy that was just on the day quicker than him. So I don't, and for no obvious benefit, I don't think he would have sort of passed George and then suddenly been on the tail of Fernando. But I don't think that would have happened. And you could tell from the way that George ultimately pulled away from him that it was a complete non-issue at the end of the day. Lewis just needed to be quicker, not just in that stint, but across the entire Grand Prix. I'm sure we're going to get into that, but I think that was the fundamental reason that he wasn't able to get past George.
Fair play, lads. Well, so I agree with both of you. Let my guy through now, please. Even if ultimately, go on then, hear me out on this. So, do you remember a couple of years ago, when I say it was Hungary, where Bottas and Lewis did the switcheroo and then switched back? Don't you want to optimise for Sir Lewis's tyre whilst they're in their optimal window and enable him to have a go? Or are you guys both saying that the pace just wasn't there to even do that at all? Nah.
There's no pace.
It was, yeah. I think the bad man probably had a bit more pace in him, and he unleashed it when he needed to, and still had more in hand. It was never going to be a.
Here's the thing I see with it is that there was about 2 laps where Lewis was sat in George's DRS. He had DRS on George. And that was before George got the message about Alonso already serving his penalty. But even then, Lewis wasn't getting enough traction on George. He got the DRS, but he wasn't getting close to him. If he was sat right on his gearbox, then I think Mercedes would have said, okay, look, Lewis has got pace, move aside. And I think George would have done it. Yeah, everyone says, oh, George isn't a team player. Let's just cast your mind back to 2021 Hungary, when after the whole shenanigans of the Lewis on his own at the start and everyone's pitted, Latifi, I think, was running something like P3, and George came on the radio and said, if you need to sacrifice me to help Nicky's race, do it. Now, I know the situations are different, that Williams are a team that have been scrapping for points and everything else, but I think that just gives a little insight into the mind of George Russell that, okay, look, yeah, he's primarily out there for himself, but he can see the bigger picture. And if needs be, he will play the team game. But in that situation, he didn't need to.
It's fair, Baxty. It's fair. I don't think... Okay, here's my deal on George. I don't think he's a team player. I don't think he's a team player. But F1, luckily for him, isn't a team sport at core. These buds are F1 drivers, and selfishness is the cost of doing business. They wouldn't be F1 drivers but for having the selfishness gene, right? Here's where I think there's a couple different things at play here. I think there are newer fans who have only seen Lewis win, right? They came into the sport because there was a new face, a black man in F1, and he's been winning ever since, right? So now that you have this young whippersnapper, an upstart in King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk, kind of leading the way and almost, I don't want to say putting Lewis under manners because that's too far, that's too extreme a term, but ostensibly at face value beating Lewis, and they're not happy with that, right? They would expect. And I kind of hear it, it's completely rogue. It's a hot take and it's very, very rogue. But I kind of feel like, as a Lewis Hamilton fan, I almost feel like George is there to facilitate the eighth. He's not. That's not what he's there for, right? If you'd hear George talk and read his body language, at every single juncture, he's on about optimizing for his own cumulative points total in the championship, right? But I do hear, as rogue as it is, lads, I do hear it because I'll say this finally before I pass to you, Shez. I feel like on more than one occasion, so even at Bahrain, right, he doesn't say, he kind of talks in these, so are we going to race, lads? Is that what we're doing here? Are we going to race and potentially jeopardize a victory? He's very assertive in kind of getting in front of the team. It's almost like he's quarterbacking the team. He's not going to wait for them. He's quarterbacking them and getting in front of them. Even at Brazil, when he's like, well, got a race victory here in a 1-2. Are we racing? Are we really racing to jeopardize this thing? So I think his tone, I think this is the giveaway as to who George Russell really is. And I'm not knocking him for this because he's an F1 driver. And of course he wants 25 points every single race. But the dead giveaway is the inconsistency in his tone. Like when it suits him, he's like, this is a bit risky, lads. Let's not race here. We got a 1-2 that's there ready for the taking. But then, do you know what I mean? When it's flip reverse, he's like, oof, like we're racing, let's go. Shez, what do you make of that, bro?
I'd say that number one, George doesn't actually owe Lewis anything. He doesn't owe the team anything either. He's got there on merit. He's proved himself in the junior categories, and he's proved himself as a good junior driver up until this point. So he's absolutely earned that place there. And second, we're 2 races into the season, right? Whether you're fighting for the 8th or fighting for fighting for just getting ahead of your teammate, actually all a team player needs to do at the moment is to be able to maximize the number of points that they bring home for the team, right? It's not about individual results necessarily, and they're not going. What we're not saying here is that if Lewis, picks up fourth place rather than fifth, that that's going to change the course of this title come the end of the season. I don't think Mercedes are in a place that they're going to be challenging for this title by the end of the season anyway. So fighting over fourth and fifth, I think is ultimately a bit moot. Being a team player means that you develop the car in a way that you're getting it to a point that it's going to be challenging for wins, not giving up fourth place because you've been asked to move aside. I don't think ultimately that makes any difference. And just one other point to that, right, is that just as soon as you were talking, I was just thinking back to Spa 1998, and when you had Damon Hill ahead of Ralph Schumacher, and he comes on the radio to Eddie Jordan and says, "I just want to put this out there, but maybe we shouldn't race." I mean, what racing driver in the right frame of mind is not going to say that? Lewis would say the same thing. He's not going to be up ahead, have George on his gearbox when George is in second place and go, "Lads, yeah, please, let's race. I really want to race." He's obviously not going to say that. No one is. Ultimately, they're racing drivers, and in a season like this one, especially, it's kind of every man for themselves a little bit, and I don't blame either of them for doing that.
So here's where I stand on this Baxty, and finally, before we move on, Peter Windsor very famously, apparently, said on a cheeky podcast called the F1 Hour that if you have a Lewis Hamilton, then you don't need a George Russell, alluding to the fact that the line of least resistance as far as a driver hierarchy and a team dynamic has always been, in a competitive season, having a very clearly delineated number one, and likewise a very clearly delineated number two, a la a Max Verstappen and a Checo Perez circa 2021 as an example. Baxty, do you think, mate, at some point in 2023 that this is gonna bubble and potentially come to a head between Lewis and George?
I'm not sure because I think the team just aren't in a position where I think it's going to matter too much. I mean, from the looks of things, I think what they're going to do is they're going to bring the major upgrades around Imola and Baku and then basically sack off the season. And I think ideally it's in Lewis and George's best interest to work together to help learn the concept and get themselves in a position to challenge next year with a quicker car once they can get on top of it. I think just one thing to say about Mercedes is Mercedes have this philosophy of having the best drivers in the car. It's a very Ron Dennis McLaren philosophy. You get your two best available drivers in the car at any one point. They don't often do the number one and number two thing. Since the turbo hybrid era, I've only ever seen them do it in 3 seasons where they have had that clear number one and number two. It was 2017, 2018, and 2021. The common denominator with all of those is that Mercedes were involved in a title fight with another team. Yeah, they didn't do it in the 3 years with Lewis and Nico. They didn't need to, because it's like, well, you're so far ahead of everyone else. Just go and race. Just don't crash into each other. That was the rule. Don't crash into each other. 2019 and 2020, they didn't have to do that. Okay, look, in 2019, Ferrari were quick, but Mercedes had such a good start that they could afford to let Bottas and Hamilton race. But in those seasons where they had Ferrari on them, where they had Red Bull on them, it was clear that Lewis was the number one and Bottas was the number two. Because Lewis had got himself into the championship position, and it would have been roles reversed if Bottas had done the same. But those were the only times that Mercedes really did that. Other teams have different philosophies. Red Bull like a 1 and 2. They've been burnt by the 2 alphas with Webber and Vettel. But that's how Mercedes choose to go racing.
But actually, I don't mean to interrupt anything, but those 2 seasons, 2017 and 2021, after a maybe slightly rocky start in 2017, certainly, Lewis asserted himself in terms of performance. That wasn't I don't think that was a clear, right, Lewis is number one. It was he'd shown that he was a quicker driver over a race stint and was getting better results than Valtteri was.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is Lewis, they only had the number one driver from when they realised, our best bet in the championship this year is Lewis.
And I don't hate that, lads. I don't hate it. Here's what I do hate, though. segue nicely on Mercedes and their design philosophy has cheesed me off, and their, I suppose, more precisely, their decision making or lack thereof, for them to continue to evolve and develop the W13 on the back of the very dodgy data that they'd received and gathered in 2022 concerns me. Now we are in a circumstance where they realise after one race apparently that beyond a reasonable doubt the route to take is to copycat Aston Martin and or Red Bull. Shez, I will come to you first on this, bruv. What do you make of this, them doing this so soon?
So I've been thinking a lot about how I wanted to answer this question over the week, and I think my thing with Mercedes is that I don't think they've actually changed the way they work, but it's a problem in the current era, and I don't think it's the technical rule change that's caused them a problem. It's the budget cap, and I think the reason for that is because, in the 8 years preceding, the way they worked was that they would take 4 or 5 different concepts and iterate each one to its logical conclusion, and then the quickest version, the quickest concept at the end of that series of iterations was what ended up on the car, and that was always going to be the quickest thing because they've absolutely exhausted everything that they could do. But you can't do that in the current budget cap era, right? You have to. Yes, you've got all this data, but what you need to then do is pick one concept and commit to it, and you're either going to have got that assessment correct, or you're not. So I don't necessarily blame them for what they did over the W13, because they started off with a car that their data was telling them was fast, but wasn't relating to what was happening on the track. But they had a quantifiable reason for why that was happening. They had the porpoising, right? And what they were saying was very logical. We all I certainly bought into that, which was that if you get rid of the porpoising, you'll understand what the base level car is. And actually, what I said to you before was that base level car actually in 2022 was pretty quick. I mean, if they had got that 1.5 seconds or whatever improvement without the porpoising at the end of Barcelona testing, we'd be having a different conversation, because that would have been the 1.5 seconds they were talking about. It's just that it took them an entire season to get rid of that porpoising, and then realize that their concept was that 1.5 seconds was the maximum they were ever going to get out of that car. But this is again a function of the way that they operate. They take all of the data, and that's what they use. They use data, and then they iterate onto what the best concept is going to be. And they can only really take what the drivers have to tell them at the end of that iterative process. And if they've chosen the wrong concept, well, then they're a bit stuffed, because in this era you can't go back to the drawing board without committing to another concept which may or may not be correct, and then iterating forwards again. It's just that Red Bull, what they've done this season or last season, was they were able to take a concept which, whether by intuition, which is more than likely given who was designing that car, have hit upon the correct concept for this rule set that balances what the data is telling them, what the driver is telling them, and they've been able to combine that into the package that they've got. And that's always been Mercedes' problem. It's about data, and it's not about intuition. What's helped them get 8 titles in a row, but it's not really helping them now.
Oh, Shez. At what point, though, mate, do you just poke your head above the parapet and say, hold on, got a disconnect here, and let's amend our course of design philosophy accordingly, Baxty? I just don't. How did we get here, mate? Because I still don't understand.
Cameron, but before you hand that over, can I ask you a question, right?
Absolutely.
If the W14 had had been the answer to all of Mercedes's dreams, right? And had done the thing that they said that it was going to do, that they'd be able to unlock all of the potential that they said they were going to be able to unlock once the porpoising had gone. Would you still be saying the same thing that you are now, that they should have just given up on that concept and done something different?
It's a good question, Shez, and I hear that your lens is very firmly honed in on processes rather than outcomes. And I get that. Me too, Shez. But sometimes, again, to your point earlier, sometimes you got to use a bit of common sense, yeah? When you're the only team of 10 that comes out with a slim pod concept, you've got to take a look at that, and you've got to engage that meaningfully with a view to understand why. Mercedes didn't do that and haven't done that for too long, and that's why I've still got to beam my bonnet around the whole thing. Again, post barge board era, how are you managing the wake off the back of the front tyres, outboard? How if not for having side pods? And that's why we're seeing, again, not to bloody flog a dead donkey here, but that's why we're seeing the likes of Red Bull extend the width and the breadth of their side pods in 2023 as versus 2022. Meanwhile, at Brackley, 0.5 pods again. What are we? I genuinely, I don't mean to rant and rave on this, but in the words of the infamous Christian Horner in a series called Drive to Survive, fix your effing car, change your effing car. It's just that obvious, right, Baxty? Surely.
Yeah, I think I've just had this thought pop in my head, and I realised that Mercedes are a team that, they get an idea and they like to do what they feel is best for them. In the last set of regs, who were one of the only teams to have a low rate car? Everyone had high rate cars.
Thank you.
Apart from Mercedes and Aston Martin.
Yeah.
Or Racing Point, or whichever iteration they went through. But they were the only two that had the low rate cars, and everyone else went down the high rate. So having a different philosophy isn't necessarily a bad thing.
True.
Yeah.
It's just about
100%.
knowing how can you exploit the performance out of it. Now, clearly, the slimline pods and whatever they're doing with the floor, it ain't working, and they realise that they've got to change it up. And there's also problems with the rear suspension as well. But I think what's got lost is I think there seems to be just data ruling overall, and I think there isn't that collaboration, certainly from the outside looking in. This is what I can see. So we've all seen the clips of James Allison saying that we rely on the driver feedback, but then after one race this season, we've got Lewis turning around and going, they didn't listen to me. I told them what I wanted and they didn't put it on the car. Now, I know James Allison's not been part of the team, but perhaps there was that. And there was also, in your interview with Peter, he mentioned I can't remember the guy's name, but he warned them about the porpoising. Yeah. He said, you will have a porpoising car. When you get a warning like that, you need to take that seriously. And yet, who was the team that was worst affected by porpoising? It was Mercedes. So I think clearly they've, whether it's arrogance or they've got taken their eye off the ball a little bit, I don't know. But certainly I think it's all well and good having a different idea. But if it doesn't work, you've basically got to have enough bravery to say, look, we got it wrong. And look, they've admitted that the win last year took them down the wrong path. Yeah. And then now they know that they've got to make some serious changes. James Allison's been brought back from the Ineos project to oversee these new upgrades, but allegedly that's still not been officially confirmed yet. But I think this is going to be a difficult season. But I think I hate to say it, 2024 is probably going to be when we see Mercedes. I will cash out my stock in Mercedes. I'll always support them, but I will cash out my hope that they can win a championship in this generation of cars, based on what we see at the beginning of next year, because at the moment they ain't winning anything
at all.
But I think that's the problem, though, isn't it? That when you had the concept that they had last season, and it did get better across I mean, that's another thing that we can talk about, in terms of the super times and things. I don't think they actually did get very much better over the course of the season. When you actually look at their outright pace, they actually didn't. They were actually slower in Abu Dhabi than they were in Bahrain. But on the face of it, they looked like they were getting better, and they got that win. And they got rid of the porpoising. And the problem for them was that did give them a sense of false hope. We have this concept that will give us 1.5 seconds improvement once we get rid of porpoising, and we're on the route to getting rid of porpoising. It's just that when they did that, they didn't have the car, and I have to say I can't absolutely blame them for doing that. When like you said, for the last 8 seasons, they've been doing something that ostensibly is against the grain, and still winning titles off the back of it. Why would this be any different? And Lewis is saying what he's saying again in hindsight, not as a I told them, but okay, when the going's good and they didn't, and you didn't need to tell them anything. The team was pushing in the right direction.
So here's my issue with that, Shez, and even the great ones do make mistakes, a la Adrian Newey 2003 MP4 18, which
not his fault, FYI.
Fair play. We can get into that another time. Shout out to the guys at the race for bringing back V10s, one of my favourite podcasts ever. Here's the issue, Shez. I will forgive anybody can make a mistake, and you can bark up the wrong tree, right? That's to be forgiven. But my problem is still, as at March 2023, is that the time, the extent to which they continued barking up the wrong design philosophy tree. When they rocked up and revealed that W14 and everybody was cheering, I was looking at the thing, I was like, what? How? Who told you that was a good idea? That doesn't make sense. Adrian Newey, for the longest time, has prioritised, again, he hasn't been 100 for 100 as far as his design concepts, right? He's also had dogs. But for the longest time, he's prioritised accessible performance, right? So you can give these GOAT drivers like a Lewis, like a Max the car, and they can wring its neck rather than these diva cars where the performance curve is super high and super narrow, and the likes of a Lewis and Max will struggle to get the 10 tenths or the extra tenth. Go on, sorry, Shez.
But Newey has also said that shifting concepts between seasons that radically, when you don't have anything to go on, and they don't really, is also tantamount to disaster. It's what McLaren did between 2012 and 2013.
And Shez, here's the thing. Here's what I'm saying. But to be super precise and specific, I'm not sure that they're doing the right thing now, and I'll come on to that in a second, because I had a chat with my guy Peter Windsor, and he was like, you got to understand what you're changing to before you change to that.
Exactly.
Peter was like, legend. I'm not sure that they understand. I think they're just seeing the grass is greener without understanding that there's sun and seed that's gone into that grass. They don't quite understand the mechanics. They're just kind of jumping ship. But my problem is this, Shez. One-off timing, mate. You gathered all of the data last season, and then you bloody come out and reveal a car that is in essence a remix of the Diva that you struggled so much with last. It just doesn't. I think Toto has a lot to account for, a lot to answer for, even as far as decision making processes. It's I just fail fast, Shez. I mean, you always argue back and forth over this.
Always. I love
fail.
This one,
don't throw good money after bad. Never in life.
But Cam, do you not need to have realised you've made a mistake for that to happen? And that was the problem that they had. The porpoising meant it hid the fact that the concept was flawed. If they'd got rid of porpoising in race 2 last season and then realised they had a car that couldn't go anywhere, they would have said, all right, fine, sack this off, let's do something different. But it took them the whole season to reliably get rid of porpoising to the point that this season they don't have it. And now they realise what the mistake was, right? And they've owned up to it. And they've owned up to it and said, we've got the wrong concept.
Everything that they have got the wrong concept, definitely. But the reason why they've got the wrong concept apparently isn't due to a disconnect it between data and what they're seeing in the real world. I'm hearing that they're now seeing, apart from a bit of instability at the rear, they're now seeing all the performance that they predicted they would see in 23 in the car. So all they've done is mismanaged or misunderstood the leaps and bounds that the other 9 have made, right? The likes of Aston and Red Bull with their rocket ship again. And that even just bad decision after bad decision. Baxty, and I just go on,
can't
Sasha.
see what the other teams have done over the winter, though, right? All they can see is what they're.
But I mean, Shez, I'm not going to do this. The bigotry of lower expectations. This is Mercedes. This is 8-time champions. Okay, so Allison's left. They didn't hire Fallows. Val's they're allowed to leave. Eric Blondin, all these bots. Andy Cowell. There's a gazillion of people that they've allowed to keep personnel as well. But nevertheless, this isn't rocket science that I'm talking about here, Shez. This is very basic, common sense decision making. And I think, and Peter always goes on about this, right? The failure of a lot of these F1 teams, most notably Mercedes in 22 and 23, to just poke their head above the parapet and just see what's going on in real time. Am I onto one, Baxty, or am I talking nonsense?
I think in this instance, yes, I think you are right. I think it's I mean, if you remember back to testing, there were all these rumors of a B-spec car and everything else, and Mike Elliott saying no, there's no B-spec car, when in reality there is. Let's be frank. They can hide it all they want, but this new upgrade that's coming is essentially going to make this the W14B, and I think it will give us an idea of where they're going to go development-wise. They may still go a different route, but they're going to look to achieve what Aston Martin and Red Bull are achieving, but doing it slightly differently. If Mercedes do that, that's fine. As I said, F1 is about competing philosophies as well as just competing drivers and everything else. But I'm positive about the fact that they have admitted that they made a mistake, because how many times have we seen teams just for years sit there and say, "Oh no, we're fine." I mean, Red Bull did that in the turbo hybrid.
True.
In the previous generation. It was a reason it took them 8 years to get back to the front of the grid. They've just found a litany of reasons as to why their car wasn't quick enough. And then eventually they hit upon something and they won a title in, questionable circumstances, but they were at least competitive that season. And it took them 8 years to get to that point. Now, I think with cost cap, I think it's possible that Mercedes could get back quicker because they will likely get more aero testing and everything else. So it probably won't take as long, but we've just got to wait and see. Though what I will say is Mercedes are currently sat level on points with Aston Martin, who are second.
That's my next point, which is very interesting. So my final is very interesting, right? Especially to people who've been ultra critical of them, like Cameron F1. Finally on this, fellas, quick fire question. Bearing in mind what you've just alluded to, Baxty, that it looked like at Saudi Arabia, the Jeddah track, that Mercedes were quicker at face value than Scuderia Ferrari. Based upon that, one word answer. Are they, look at me walking back everything that I've said, fail fast, Cameron said, are they potentially making this U-turn decision too soon? One word answer, Shez.
As in a Mercedes making the U-turn too soon?
Yeah. Bearing in mind their performance at Jeddah.
Oh, you want a one-word answer, but I still don't think they're doing a U-turn. I think they are gonna go their own way. So I'm gonna say yes, they need to change something.
Okay.
Are they making the U-turn too soon? No, I think they have a fundamentally competent car, but it's not a car capable of winning championships, and that's what Mercedes is in the business of doing. So they need to find a concept that will win them championships.
There you go. Don't hate that, lads. Right, let's talk about. I can't even get to FIA, man. It's too much. I just get on my nerves. Let's talk about the Red Bull pairing for now, because I feel like that's gonna get juicy. over the next couple of races potentially, unless Max Verstappen can revert to type and start putting Checo Perez under manners, which is probably the Occam's razor, probably the most likely scenario, right? But a couple things struck me. Firstly, Max didn't park up where he was supposed to park up, right, which could have been an innocent mistake. But I think Max Verstappen tends to move in silence and very deliberately with these things, 9 times out of 10. Secondly, when they got to the bloody cool-down room, you saw that Max parked himself up in the number 1 chair, didn't he? There's like a 1, 2, and 3. He very deliberately made the beeline for the number 1 chair. Just Verstappen's face again, Mr. Grumpy. Anytime my son doesn't win, there's got to be something. All is not right with the world. I say all that to say, lads, is it a matter of time in 2023 with Checo Perez in the last year of his contract that these two are going to bump heads materially at some point, Shez?
Probably not. I think Max had this race under control until he had that drive shaft failure in qualifying, and I think he would have probably got a pole very comfortably, and probably would have won the race pretty easily as well if he hadn't been coming through from 15th. I think Checo did great in the last stint to maintain that 5 seconds, and Max got some luck with the safety car. I'll definitely give you that. But, all things were not equal in Saudi. And if they had been, I think Max would have been winning that race anyway. And we would have just been talking about the steamroller again. And I think that's probably the pattern that we're going to see over the course of the season.
Water on my competitive hopes and dreams, Shez. How very dare you? Surely Checo Perez has enough pace in his final year to take it to Max. Just a little bit, Baxty. Do you reckon, mate?
I think Checo is going to be less inclined to support Max this year. I think Max is probably going to kick his ass into next week. But I think there were a few interesting things that I was picking up. I mean, look, Checo deserved to win that race. He was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. He did exactly what Red Bull needed him to do. Okay, Max is compromised. Go get us pole position. Nailed it. Okay, you lost the lead off the start. Go chase down Alonso. He did. Dominated the race after that. And even, as Shez has said, brilliant in the last stint, keeping that 5 seconds. Okay, Max was having a reoccurrence of his drive shaft, but you still have to execute under pressure. But there are a few things that happened during that race and after that race where I thought, okay, things might get a little spicy here. And there was Max basically ignoring the order to maintain pace at about a 1:33. He was ignoring that fairly consistently.
Is that true though, Baxty? Is that true? Because I'm seeing different reports, mate. I saw a written transcript. Have you seen the same thing, Shez? I've seen a written transcript of. So I understand that Checo wasn't happy because he thinks, or tried to make out like he was given, like you said, Baxty, he was given hold fire. The machinery is vulnerable. We have a 1-2. Relax yourself, lads. In the transcript that I read, he asked, "Can I push?" And he was pushing. All that happened to him on the last lap is that he botched his first sector.
So from what I think, I may be misattributing this completely. I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but I think Dr. Obbs, the legend that is, put a thread out on Twitter where he had gone through the radio chatter.
Oh, wow.
And basically, Checo was told do 1:33s, and when he was given the 1:26+4 message, he was basically being told, "Look, Max is going quicker. If you want to just maintain your pace," which he did to a certain extent. But what Max did at the end of the race, obviously by doing a 1:31.9 and taking the fastest lap, that was a dick move. But I mean, obviously, taking the point off your teammate and maintaining that lead in the World Championship, because Checo would have had the World Championship lead. But that was Max just saying, "Look, I'm still number 1 around here. You got lucky this weekend because I had a problem on my car, but I'm still the king around here. Just you enjoy your moment in the sun." But I feel like the first year or so of Checo's contract, he's felt very, very deferential to the team because they essentially saved his career. But now I think all bets are off. He's just going to be out for himself. I think he never forgot Barcelona when they told him to not get in Max's way. There are a couple of other instances as well. And of course, there was Brazil last year when it all got spicy between them with Max not letting Checo through. Yeah, I think Checo's just going to do what's best for Checo at this stage. He probably knows he's got 1 year left. He may not get another contract out of this, so he's just going to try and make hay whilst the sun shines, and see what he can do. But I think it could blow up, but I don't think it's going to be sort of a Webber Vettel situation because it's Max for the championship, Checo picking up the scraps. But if Checo's winning a race and then they tell him to move aside, may not see that happen. He might, my radio's going. Oh no, I don't know, I can't hear you. Like, do the old that or something. Yeah.
Baxty, let me counter you a second, because not only a couple of minutes after we almost unanimously declared innocent George Russell of being a Judas Iscariot, claiming that he's an F1 driver, are we not then being a smidgen inconsistent in saying that Max doing what F1 drivers do on the last lap and seizing the point for the fastest lap was a bit of a dick move? Is that...
Oh, I've got no issue with him doing it. It is a dick move, but I've got, he's doing what he feels he needs to do. The fact that he could compute, it's like, hang on, Checo's going to have the championship lead here, and I'm losing this race, so I'm going to get one over on him. And it's Max knows that his only competition is Checo, so land that psychological blow, even if it's just a small one. He's going to try and get every little advantage over Checo. He knows he can beat Checo, but he just wants to reinforce the point, and that's what a top level world champion F1 driver should do.
It's a killer, isn't he? He'll absolutely keep his foot on your neck at every single juncture. I tell you what, Shez, riddle me this. Do you think that... So I watched Max in the kind of post show, and I just heard him, like, he said verbatim that he wasn't happy, right? Quote, "I'm not happy because I'm fighting for a title with my teammate, and my car wasn't reliable and his car was, and the team need to make sure that both machines are reliable." Shez, what did you make of this, bruv? Go on, talk to me, be honest.
Okay, so first of all, he's differentiating himself from other, like, multiple world champions, right? You'd never hear Michael Schumacher saying anything like that. Like, it was always team number one. They're all amazing. They give me the car. I'm able to win races because of them, blah. Totally get that. But Max has had a sort of slightly funny route into that team. It's always been push. I mean, the reason he got into the Red Bull Junior program is because Mercedes weren't able to give him a race seat early enough, and the reason he got into the senior team is because Red Bull was again sort of scared to lose him, so they just said, "All right, Kvyat, off you go. We'll get you in." So it's always been. I think he has always felt like the team is slightly deferential to him, and the team seem to play that a little bit as well. Like the way Horner talks about him, it's always, "Oh, man, we need to keep Max happy, and we need to, like, defend what he's done at all times." And I think that's why Max has it feels like he can talk like that about the team. But I don't really have a problem with it, with anything that he's saying. Like he's right. Yes, Checo might kick up a bit more of a fight this season than he has before, but let's not kid ourselves into thinking this is going to turn into a Hamilton Rosberg classic. That's not what this season's going to be.
True.
This is going to be, if all things being equal, every single race.
Oh yeah, Max will gap him massively
every time.
Anywhere
time.
That's not a street circuit, Max clearly has.
Even if it is a street circuit, I think, and I think Saudi isn't like a proper...
You might see Shez. You might see Checo.
You might see me.
Let's go. You might see Checo go well around a Monaco, dare I say.
I think he might be a bit closer.
And I think you might see him go well around a Singapore as well. Because those, again, it's the real limited bods that speak to him, his ability to get on the accelerator nice and quickly after a slow hairpin turn. I think you might see that, Shez. But here's where I stand on this. I've been getting deep into Simon Barnes' Meaning of Sport again. One of the best books. Have you read it, Shez?
No, but I saw your link.
Mate, one of the best books that I've ever read. And he states that to be great, you've got to do great things. And I've always been one to try and differentiate and separate sports endeavour and achievement and the personality outside of the sports arena. Sadly, though, on Sunday, I'm watching Max, I'm thinking, mate, you've got this rocket ship car. You guys saw Martin Brundle nearly lost his mind at the way that Max came round George on the inside. It was a joke. He'd been setting up with everyone else, he'd been playing chess and setting up the move into the pit straight. That time, he just went full Fast and Furious NOS mode and blitzed him up the inside. Martin nearly lost his mind, as did I and probably both of you guys. So you have this ridiculous car. Can you imagine if he was in Mercedes with all the shenanigans going on there, what he'd be like, the rate at which he'd be, like the F-bombs that would be good. So I say all that to say I was a bit disappointed as a bit of a Max cheerleader, because we all acknowledge that he's incredible. He can steer, lads, whatever we want to say about his personality, he can steer. But for once, I was watching, I was like, for fuck's sake, Max. Really, mate? Really? If I'm your engineer or bloody a mechanic back in the garage and I'm putting in all-nighters and the guys back in Milton Keynes are nailing it, the likes of Giampiero Lambiasi and all them lot, and this is how you repay us. This is the sort of chat that's coming out your mouth. Shez, I'm not having it, mate. I think it's really bad.
I think it comes down to how you view this sport, right? Is it that the team are building a car for the driver, right, to win a title? Or is it that the driver is driving a car for the team? And I think those are two that's a distinction that needs to be made. Because I think the way Max drives a car is I'm here to win a championship and they're building a car for me.
Give me what I need.
That's it.
That's rude, Shez.
But that's how he's built. That's just how he's built. And
bonkers, mate.
And mate, he has been on brand every single race. In Brazil last season, we disagreed about this, right? Because you said he's a knobhead for doing what he's done. And I said
it's fourth place.
Checo should have been quicker.
Oh, bro, I can't even cope with this, Shez. Like, how can you be... Okay,
I don't like it. Listen, man, I don't like it. But it's very on brand for him.
Bruv, I can't even deal with it, man. How can you be? So here's the question I might ask you, Baxty, and this is a complete non sequitur. You can't square these teeth. How can somebody be so good and in the same sentence, in the same vein, such a douche? Like, that just makes... I just can't, make this make sense, Baxty.
I mean... To give a crude comparison, Novak Djokovic might be one of the greatest tennis players of all time, but he's a bit of a douchebag as well. It's look, I mean, Max was like this last year as well. When he had his 2 DNFs, he was just like, this is completely unacceptable. We shouldn't be doing this, blah, 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 blah. That's just the way he's built. You don't have to like it. There are people out there who'll be like, yeah, Max, you're absolutely right. Whereas we're like, okay, douchebag, whatever, I mean, what I will say is this, it's one thing for a driver to be like, I only want to win. It's not acceptable that my car broke down, blah, blah, blah. It's another thing and this was one of the other stories of the weekend, for a team principal to turn around and say he no longer trusts his engineers. And I'm looking at you, Franz Tost, because that was a torpedo at AlphaTauri.
No, lads, it's getting taken. That's another 30 minutes worth. Go on, Shez. You look like you got something to say on that.
No. I'm totally in agreement with that. But I also, I take it one step further. I don't think Max would be the competitive animal that he is without the mentality that he has. I just don't. Bruv.
Yeah, you are. You nail it. You can't separate beauty from the beast, right? Like in terms of Max, it's wrapped up in one, and you, sadly, for me as a person who's in love with the gentlemanly sport and sports etiquette and racing etiquette, the Sterling Moss giving his car to fan, you know what I mean? I pine for those days of honour and humility, and for Max to be, he's on the way very firmly to greatness. But for him to come out with that after that race, after the way that he pulled off that move on George Russell, thinking, mate, like how little gratitude can one man have? I don't know.
Cam, everyone gets their, like every driver
That's
will
different.
come up at some point against someone that is gonna be faster than them, is just gonna be better, and that's gonna happen to Max at some point as well. And then he's gonna have to look back at stuff that he said now and think, well, did I really? Am I glad I said that? And maybe he won't. But right now, it's what drives him, and wanting every last little millimeter of performance, and not being happy when he doesn't get it. That's him, and he's not alone in that, in the pantheon of greats that have driven F1 cars.
Bloody Nora Shez. That's techie, and makes me sad, brother. If I'm honest with you, I don't know. Imagine
reality,
it.
man.
Anyway,
It's reality.
and on that bombshell, I'm going to close, chaps. You guys have been legends. As always, we'll be back same time, same place next week, talking all of the F1 stuff. Luckily for me, with my anxiety, we didn't even talk about the FIA, did we? I will leave that, mate. We can't.
I've ranted enough about that.
It's same old. No new news as far as the FIA concerned. It's not great, is it? Not great. Anyway, chaps, I will wrap on that. Thank you so much for watching. If you are watching on the YouTubes, like, comment, subscribe, because that helps a lot. If you are listening on a podcasting platform, whether that be Apple iTunes, Spotify, scroll to the top up here and leave us a 5-star rating, if you could, please. And if you enjoy it, don't hesitate to share it with one of your F1 mates, because again, my right honourable colleagues, Grizzled F1 Scribes, co-host of the Shakedown podcast, Baxty and Shez, always doing it. Baxty at BaxtyB on Twitter, BaxtyB F1 on YouTube, putting out market-leading content each and every single week, at ShezMed on Twitter for the hot takes and the deep dives and the sexy information always. We will, as always, see you same time, same place next week. Between now and then, hug somebody that you love. And as always, remember to look but never stare. Bye.